Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be checking out the Skyzone SKY03 FPV goggles. Now, when I have reviewed all the recent attempts at the compact FPV goggle market, such as the EV100s and the Top Sky F7Xs, time and time again I saw comments that said, actually the Skyzone SKY02 goggles are the best and not the Fat Shark Dominator HD3s that I currently own. And I'm sad to say that I never got the chance to check out the SKY02s, but here we have their latest offering, and I'll say this, it's looking pretty good. But before I move on, I want to put a disclaimer out there, because I don't actually like reviewing goggles. I like using them, but they are the worst things to review. You see, if I'm reviewing an RTF model or a camera or something like that, even if I believe it's the best product in the world, you guys can see the DVR footage and you can watch me do a full flight and decide for yourself if it's for you or not, regardless of what I think about it. Whereas with goggles, you have to take my word for it that what I'm saying is true. And that's where the other issue comes into play when reviewing goggles, especially these compact goggles. And the issue is that they are extremely specific to the shape of your face and how far apart your eyes are. And I've got a wonky face and wonky eyes. So, if I say these goggles are no good, for example, they might be perfect for you and vice versa. And I always advise, if you can try on a pair of goggles before buying them, then do so, because everyone is going to get different results. But that being said, here is my experience of these goggles from a wonky face and a wonky eye perspective. Now, if you are a fan of the SKY02s, you might not like these because they've done away with the 16:9 aspect ratio, and it's not swishable either, so you're stuck in the 4:3 format. And personally, I prefer this because my favourite cameras are all 4:3, but if you're into the 16:9 cameras, this goggle is definitely not for you. I always think that you can get used to viewing a 4:3 image in 16:9, but not the other way around. But otherwise, the specs of these goggles are impressive, so let's take a look at them compared to the competition. So, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the price, which I don't like to do because prices change on a daily basis, but at the making of this video, these goggles are £353, and you can use Google to translate that into your currency. I'm not going to sit here all day and go through the different currencies. And the Aomway Commanders are £229, and the Fat Shark Attitude V4s are £257. And of course, we then have the flagship Fat Shark HD3s at £294 for the new Core edition, which I'm glad they've released actually because it makes them a lot more affordable. But this does, however, make the Skyzones the most expensive out of the lot. And by the way, the original SKY02s are around £240. So, unless you count the Dominator HD3 Full Edition price, which sits at around £368, then the Skyzones are the most expensive. So I think it's fair to say that the HD3s are probably its main competitor, but you have to take into consideration that the Sky03s have their dual diversity receivers built in, and they are supporting 48 channels including race band, and it's got its own menu system that is built into the goggles. And if you add something like the true diversity system to the Fat Sharks, for example, then it starts to get very expensive with the Fat Sharks. So it's important to note that the Skyzone receivers are not removable, so you won't be able to use any of the aftermarket modules out there, such as the True Diversity system, but you could, for example, use an external system through the AV import with, say, a ground station, but more on that later. So if the Skyzone's biggest competitor are the HD3s, let's compare them directly on specs. Now the Skyzones have matched and exceeded the field of view of the HD3s with a field of view of 43 degrees, and here is a comparison of the two. And we have the same resolution of 800 by 600, which is not HD, just like the HD3s, but it should be perfect for standard definition FPV, which is pretty much what we are here for. And of course the goggles do have a HDMI in if you want to use the Connect system or perhaps a Phantom's HDMI signal. But something important to note about the HDMI in is that the HD3s convert HDMI sources to 16 by 9, whereas the Skyzones don't, just like the Fat Shark HD2s, so everything is in 4:3, which will stretch the image, giving the wrong aspect ratio, unless your HDMI source is 4:3, but I'd imagine that that would rarely be the case. Of course, if you are wanting to view movies, maybe through a PC, you could use something like VLC Player to correct the aspect ratio for you. And yes, just like the Fat Sharks, there is also a side-by-side 3D mode as well. So that's pretty much a comparison of the specifications compared to the Fat Sharks out of the way. So before I get accused of working for them, let's get into the nitty-gritty about the Skyzones. So the box is split into two parts. One contains the goggles along with the hard case, the faceplate, and 3 comfort surround options. The first comfort surround is a very thin faux leather pad for all of the vegans out there, and then we have 2 other foam pads of slightly different thicknesses. So this might be a deal breaker for some of you, so I'll mention it now. The faceplate is very similar to the Aomway Commanders in that it doesn't wrap around my wonky face very well. It flattens out compared to the Fat Sharks, which wrap around my face much better. That being said, the thicker foam pad helps a lot with that, but the really thin pad is very uncomfortable for me, and it also causes the nose piece of the goggle to rub on the bridge of my nose, which makes things very uncomfortable. So if the thicker foam is more comfy for you, I found that there is a trade-off with that, and that is that it pushes my face further away from the lenses, which does make the edges of the screens blurred, but I'll talk more about that later. In the other box, you are given a bunch of cables for the AV in and AV out. We also have 2 head tracker connectors, one ending in a phono cable and the other ending in a connector that I've not seen before, and the end of both of those plugs into the goggles, and I think this is called a PS2 connector. So yes, these goggles have a built-in head tracker, so again, comparing them to the Fat Sharks, you have to add a expensive module to those to get the same results. However, most mini-quad pilots aren't using a head tracker, so that's more of a niche thing for fixed wing FPV, but if you're into that, then these goggles could be a big plus for you. So you're also given 2 rubber ducky SMA antennas. Yes, you heard me right, they are using SMA, so all of your immersion antennas are going to fit just fine. In fact, I'm using a Bandicoot antenna here from Menace, and also a Aomway cloverleaf here, and I would recommend that you discard both of the stock antennas, as I don't think they're going to be much use to you. Then you are given a XT62 12-volt DC connector, which you might think is bad news because yes, this goggle, just like the Aomways, doesn't come with a battery, but the goggles do take from a 2S to a 6S voltage, so you can use this cable with any of your LiPos pretty much. Funnily enough, I bought a spare Fat Shark battery for using with these goggles, and it turned up having been on fire in the post. Now, I don't know what it is with me and fires these days, but it's just getting ridiculous. So yeah, Fat Shark sent me a fire in the post. Thank you.
Will you excuse me for a moment, please, Mr. Hutton? I'm a little bit on fire.
Anyways, yes, this goggle will take a Fat Shark battery, but you will want to adjust the LiPo settings in the menu, which I'll show you a little bit later. The LiPo slots nicely into the side of the head strap, which has the Skyzone logo on the side of it. And while on the subject of the head strap, you are given this optional top piece to make it a 3-point harness. Now, you do have to remove the strap from the side of the goggle to fit it, and it's also not quite big enough for my big head, so I'll probably not use it, but it's nice to have it as an option, and it fits through the top of the faceplate here as well. So, finally, we have the goggles. These are the black edition, and I'd strongly advise you to get the white ones. Yes, even in my dark part of the world, the sun does come out occasionally, and when it does, this black version will heat up, and the white ones will stay cool, so I'd say go with the white ones if you can. Now, the material is very similar to the Aomway Commanders. I'd describe it as a soft touch material. And I want to mention something really strange at this point about these goggles. They came with diopters installed, but there's no power in them at all. My prescription is -2 in one eye and -1.7 in the other, and I can't see any correction going on in these stock diopters. What's even more interesting is that despite my poor eyesight, a diopter is not needed to get a completely clear picture through these goggles, which suggests whatever optics they have used, it doesn't require you to look into the distance, and that is pretty refreshing actually, because I absolutely bashed Fat Shark for their blurred picture for the short-sighted amongst us, and of course you have to buy the extra diopters, which is more expense. So I'm not sure what the deal is with these fake diopters. I removed them and I don't see any difference to the picture whatsoever, but it does bring me back to something that I said earlier, in that the sizing of these diopters is very similar to the Fat Shark diopters. It's not quite the same. As you can see, I've installed my -2 diopters here, and they fit quite loose compared to these false ones, and these false ones fit really tightly, by the way. However, if I put the Fat Shark diopters in here, it shrinks the field of view enough to make the edges of the picture to be more in focus, and I have to say that I'm happy with the image that I'm getting from these now with my -2 diopters in place. Without the diopters and the thick foam plates, the edges of the image are very blurred. It reminds me of the Fat Shark HD2s, but with these correctional diopters I'm fairly happy with it, but the HD3s do still do a better job, and the picture is clearer for me personally with the HD3s. Of course, if everyone in your village has a similar surname and your eyes are really close together, I don't think you'll experience any blurring whatsoever with these goggles. But anyways, the corrective diopters have definitely improved the blurring that I was experiencing with the thicker foam plate. So, there are a few more things unique to this goggle. First, you can see that we've got the LED light strip on the front, and this is controllable through the menus. We also have the signature 60-degree field of view camera, which is actually a lot of fun to play around with, but it's not that great in the dark, which will give you some indication of what I've been doing with it. We also have a power button on the side, so yes, if you are careless like me, you can leave your battery connected, and you have to press the button down for, I think it's 3 seconds to turn the goggles on and off, and then once they're turned on, the button then acts as a on and off button to turn the fan on and off. Then, looking from above, we have a huge array of buttons which are multifunctional, so you better have a really good memory if you want to use these functions quickly. So, a short press of the camera button switches the view through the screens to the camera. I think this is a novelty personally, and in the field I probably won't use it. It doesn't take much effort to lift goggles up to see where you're going. But I tell you what, it's a lot of fun trying to walk around the house using it, that's for sure. So a long press of the camera button takes you into the diversity menu. and a further press does a band scan of the 5.8 gigahertz frequencies, and it'll land on the strongest channel, and as well as that, it'll show you the RSSI value, and there's no need to calibrate the RSSI like you have to do with a lot of these diversity modules, which is a welcome feature for me because I just hate messing about. You can also use the mode and record buttons to move up and down the other channels that it has found within the band scanner, and I've tested this against the True Diversity band scanner, and the calibration is exactly the same. Both of them find the exact strength of channels, which is good news because it means the Skyzone goggles are accurate. And to cancel out of the band scanner menu, you do a long press of the camera button, and then at the same time it will save the channel that you landed on. But if you pull the battery before exiting the menu, then it won't save the channel, so don't do that. Next, we have the record button. A short press of this will show you the on-screen display at the top. So this tells you things such as the free space on your SD card, as well as if you've got an SD card connected. And it'll also show you the channel and band that you are on, as well as the goggles battery voltage, which is pretty neat. Another press of the record button will start the DVR recording, but it's important to note that you have to be receiving a picture from your copter before it will start recording. Otherwise, nothing will happen, but for some reason, after it's picked up that initial picture, it will let you record anything. So like, just the snow, if you've unplugged the battery from your copter, which is good because if we lose video signal, we want the DVR to carry on recording. So when you start the video recording, you have a little record icon in the top corner and a counter that starts to go up. Then soon after that, the on-screen display will disappear until you press the record button again, and a further press of the record button will stop the recording. My advice here would be to go into the settings, which I'll show you a little bit later, and make it so that the on-screen display doesn't time out. Otherwise, you can't see if the DVR is still recording or not. So the DVR will work in the RF mode, and it'll also work in the AV in mode as well, which is nice if you are getting your FPV from another source. So the DVR records in a X264 MOV format at a resolution of 720 by 480 at 25 frames per second, and the data rate of that is 6 megabit per second. And that is with NTSC sources, and for PAL sources it records 720 by 576, again at 25 frames per second and again at 6 megabit. So although the resolution is slightly higher than the Fat Shark's, the bitrate is halved, and there doesn't seem to be any screenshot options, which I'm fine with because it's not a feature that I've ever used on any DVR. I just use the DVR to show you guys the reception of copters, but it's actually designed to find lost models when you've slung a battery. And just while I'm on the subject of the DVR, there doesn't seem to be a capacitor installed. So if you're recording and you pull the battery away from the goggles, you will lose your video file. It doesn't even save like a corrupted file. There just won't be any file on there whatsoever, which I think is a little bit of a shame. So you must always remember to stop your recording before unplugging your battery. So a long press of the record button will take you into the playback mode of the DVR, and the record button then acts as a play and pause button. Then the band and channel buttons on the other side act as a reverse and fast forward option up to 8 times speed. The head tracker button then acts as a delete function if you long press it, but you'll only be able to delete the files if you press the mode button to cancel the playback mode, and you'll be prompted to delete the file by pressing the record button to confirm. It's a little bit clunky, but it does work. But if you're in that record mode option, long pressing the tracker button won't do anything. You won't be able to delete it. So yeah, it's a little bit of a pain to work around. So yeah, a further press of the mode button will cancel the playback mode, and in general the mode button acts as a cancel or exit button in most of the menus. So a single press of the mode button will bring up the top on-screen display if you haven't set it to time out, and a further press will bring up another menu, and we have the RF normal option. Then to move up and down this menu, you use the band and channel buttons again, and the record button becomes the OK button. Then we have the race band options. Yes, for some reason the race band is a completely different option, and if you enter into it, the band and channel buttons cycle up and down the race channels only. You can also select the AV in feature here as well, and also the HDMI input, and a third press of the mode button will exit you out of that menu. And a long press of the mode button will turn the goggles into side-by-side 3D mode, which takes the signal being received by both of the diversity receivers and it splits it down the middle rather than taking different images from each receiver, which some systems have had in the past. Then another long press of the mode button will take you out of it. So, oh man, there's just so many multiple features on these buttons. It's a downside of these for sure. But if you want all of these features in such a small, compact goggle, then this is how they've done it. So, over to the band and channel buttons, and those ones speak for themselves. You'll notice the band and channel change in the on-screen display, and it'll save the last used channel when the goggles are powered off. So long pressing the band and channel buttons alters the volume of the audio out if you're using the headphone port underneath. And finally, we have the head tracker button. So a short press of it, according to the manual, will calibrate level for your head tracker. I don't have any head tracking models to confirm that this works. However, a long press of the head tracking button will take you into the main settings menu of the goggles. And once again, all of the other buttons have a double function. So, the first page displays the head tracker options such as the PPM channels and the tilt options, etc. Another press of the head tracker button will page over to the picture settings where you have the brightness, contrast, saturation, hue and sharpness, etc. And it's really worth playing around with those. You can use the band and channel buttons to go up and down these options, and then the record button becomes the select option, and once selected, the band and channel buttons then become the plus and minus for that particular option. So yeah, some of these buttons have 3 functions in some cases. It's a nightmare. The mode button always sends you back to the option previously, and it cancels out of the menus as well, so it's really the only button that has some consistency to it. So if you're wondering how to cancel out of anything, just press the mode button. So using the tracker button to page over again, and that gives us recording options such as cyclic recording and auto recording, as well as the video length, and 30 minutes is the max you can go up to there. And then we have the option to record or not record audio as well. Then another tab along lets you choose how long until the OSD times out, and also the OSD transparency and its position. I strongly recommend that you don't have it time out so that you can see your recording. Now, this last option controls the LED sequence. It was turned off out of the box, but you have so many different light sequences to choose from if you're into that sort of thing. I've kept it on the breathe RGB option. And then from there, tabbing over again gives you some more really important options. Out of the box, the power supply was set to DC in, which meant that my 2-cell Fat Shark battery would cause the goggle to beep for a low voltage alarm. So I've changed that to 2S, and you're going to want to adjust that to whatever battery that you are using. We then have the fan speed, and I've got this set to ultra low. And unfortunately, just like the top skies, even the ultra low setting will dry out your eyes. So don't even bother with any of the higher settings. Well, that's my opinion anyway. As I mentioned, you can short press the power button to turn the fan on or off, and hopefully it will defog your goggles before your eyelids dry shut or open. Then we have the format SD card setting. Now they recommend that you do this, and it seems that this goggle is really fussy about what micro SD card that you can use. It has to be a class 10, and I'm using a 32GB here. I think this is a bit unnecessary, as we aren't exactly recording in 1080p, and with the Fat Sharks I use the most cheapest and rubbish SD cards that I can find, and they work fine. That isn't the case with this goggle, which is a bit of a waste if you ask me. And I found that these Lexmark micro SD cards are working nicely, but I tried this ScanDisk one here and the recording kept stopping. So yeah, just my findings. It seems like these goggles are very fussy about what SD cards you use, which isn't great because you want reliability when you are recording. So anyway, back to the menu, and finally you have the option to do a factory reset, and after that a press of the mode button will cancel us out of this menu. So while I'm impressed with the settings of this goggle, I have to say it's a head blag remembering what all the functions do. But for the most part, I'll probably just be touching the DVR record button anyways, so as long as that works, then all of the rest of the settings can do one. So next, let's take a look at the underneath of the goggles. Everything is nicely labelled, which makes my job a lot easier. We have the head tracker PS2 connection on the bottom left. Then above that we have the Ipd adjustment, and with my wonky eyes I have to have them maxed out to the size. I really wish goggle manufacturers would give a wider adjustment, but that is specific to my eyes and it might not be the case for you. Then on the other side we have the HDMI input and the AV in and the AV out phono sockets as well. And then we have a USB port, which I'm hoping will be for updates. How about a aspect ratio switcher Skyzone, nudge nudge, wink wink. And finally we have a headphone jack and the SD card slot. So these goggles are feature packed and they should be for the price. So let's go and fly a copter with them and see what the picture is like. So one of the problems that these kind of goggles sometimes have is that they crop off parts of your image. So if you're running an on-screen display, it can cut off some of the figures. I didn't find that to be much of a problem with the Skyzones. They do slightly crop off the sides a bit more than the HD3s do. So I think if you put everything on your on-screen display to the extreme edges, then you might see a tiny bit of cropping, but I don't think it's worth worrying about with the Skyzones. It's nowhere near as bad as the Top Skies. Just make sure that you give yourself one space in on the sides of your on-screen display and you'll be fine. However, if you aren't in control of that for whatever reason, then you might see a tiny amount of cropping, but I think even the Fat Sharks in some scenarios do that, and you won't have the cropping on the recorded DVR footage. It'll give you the full amount, which is nice. Now, let's talk about screen quality, and this is something that you're going to have to take my word for. Out of the box, the image was really dull, and the contrast is set too high. But I found that if you mess with the brightness and contrast settings, you can get them to match the quality of the HD3s, which is good news because the screens on the HD3s are really good, and yeah, you can get the Skyzones to match that for sure. The DVR records about the same quality as the Fat Sharks despite being half the bitrate. I guess it makes up for that in the resolution slightly, but it's still not as good as if you record from a TV capture card from a computer. So I think there's still a lot of improvements that can be done when it comes to DVRs in goggles. This Copter has a PAL camera, and the Skyzone's DVR has squashed the image slightly compared to the Fat Sharks, which I think keeps a better aspect ratio, but in general this is a small thing and can be corrected in an editor very easily anyways if you are OCD about aspect ratios like I am. As for the reception of the receivers, I'd say that it was really good. I don't think it's quite on par with the True Diversity system, but it's very close. One thing you have to take into consideration is that with the True Diversity system, both of the antennas face in the same direction, whereas with the Skyzones, unless you put an adapter on there with this Bandicoot antenna that I'm using, then it's mostly facing away from the copter, just where I'm standing. And I think that is why the True Diversity system has appeared to work better. Other than that, I do think a lot of people are going to like these goggles, but I don't think they're going to replace my Dominator HD3s, and this is why. The HD3s fit my wonky face much better, and with the included faceplate and their diopters, which you do have to buy, I get a clearer image, and there's no blurring around the edges whatsoever. I must stress, though, that this is a personal thing to myself, and it might not be the case for you. In fact, when I got the HD3s originally, they had a problem. I had to send them off. They also had blurred edges, and they put a fix in there, and there's no problems anymore. So the Fat Sharks aren't perfect, but like I say, they're still going to be my main goggle. The HD3s have a super cap fitted to them, so if I've been stupid and unplugged the battery without stopping the recording, I won't have lost my video footage, whereas with the Skyzones you will lose your footage. And with the DVR being so specific to certain SD cards, it's not as versatile or as reliable as the Fat Shark system, which does have its flaws, but it's really simple to use, and it's not failed on me in any single situation so far. And lastly, although the Skyzones are extremely capable with their built-in diversity and all of the menus, you are stuck with that system. So for example, the Clearview system that's going to be coming out for the Fat Sharks is set to change the way that we receive video for these type of goggles, and you're not going to be able to add them to the Skyzones. And you'd have to, you know, get the full Clearview system and use a ground station, etc. Which is an option, but, you know, there you go. So that is my opinion, and I think in general they are a good goggle, especially compared to all the other ones that have been released lately. They have less issues and bugs for sure, and hopefully they will continue to improve them through that USB port. I'd like to see that for sure. So I'll leave a link in the description if you wish to get some, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.